The Grandy Group. Fred Grandy, Brian Neiman on 630 WMAL.
737 on the Grandy Group.
All right, two considerations this morning as we look at the Middle East. One, how good is our intelligence network as the Middle East continues to implode? And two, what should our energy policy be going forward? The best person to probably talk about that is Jim Woolsey. He is the former CIA director under Bill Clinton, 93 to 95, currently chairman of Woolsey Partners, and also a senior fellow at Yale's Jackson Institute for Global Affairs, where he lectures on Middle East energy dependence. Jim, good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Fred?
I'm good. But I have to ask you, given the fact that it seems as though daily governments in the Middle East are imploding and then reorganizing, as a guy who used to head up the CIA, obviously the demand for quality intelligence has never been greater. Are we able to meet this challenge right now?
Well, complicated question. I think that we probably have a pretty good feel for sort of the underlying reality and movements and groups in that part of the world. But I don't think we were on top of how likely it was to come apart. I wouldn't fault anyone for not forecasting the date and circumstances. Who would have known that a Tunisian individual burned himself a month ago would have started this cascade. But I think the fragility of the Middle East, after all these years of our backing all these despots of one kind or another, largely in order to hold on to our stability for reasons of oil supply, has just built up a huge reserve of anger. I mean, Saleh yesterday, who's been an ally of the United States in counterterrorism, the president of Yemen, is starting to shriek about we're running all of these riots through a command post. The Americans are through a command post in Tel Aviv. I mean, it's just...
that sounds like something Ahmadinejad would say.
Yeah, it does, and it's just. And in Yemen, another thing that's happening is that the Al Qaeda supporting groups are joining the riots, and often in revolutions you'll have a period of complete chaos, and then it will look for a time as if the good guys are going to control things. The Mensheviks in Russia in 1917, and the liberals in Iran in 78, 79. Yeah. And then after a period, usually of a few months, the bad guys, who are much better organized and much more ruthless, kill a lot of the good guys and take charge, the Bolsheviks, the Khomeinists in Iran in 78, 79. So we've got to be careful here, even if things look like they're going well for a while, even if the Muslim Brotherhood people say, nobody here but us Democrats.
Right.
It could well go very sour later.
This is more maybe of a military question than a CIA question, although I think they're all intertwined these days. But last week, Secretary Gates said essentially that any future Secretary of Defense who advises sending in a big army into Asia, the Middle East, or Africa should, quote, have his head examined. Would you agree with that comment, and does that mean we should probably do more intelligence in those places than we should have an actual army there?
Well, big army, yeah, I mean, I think the national appetite for that after Iraq and Afghanistan, one of which Iraq may have turned in a positive direction, in part because President Bush was willing to listen to General Keane and others and send a bigger army called the Surge back in 07, 08. That may have turned things around in Iraq, but as far as the future goes, the difficulties we're having in Afghanistan, mainly because of the Pakistani willingness along the eastern side of Afghanistan to shelter Al Qaeda as they come out of Afghanistan. The difficulties we're having, I'm sure, have sapped the American people's interest in having a land army in that part of the world. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be prepared from time to time to use force, such as having a no-fly zone over Libya. I can't understand why we keep delaying on that. That could turn the balance in Libya, and the Libyan rebels are asking for it.
Let me ask you an energy question before we let you go, because I guess reluctantly, the Interior Secretary Ken Salazar is at least rolling back this drilling moratorium, allowing some offshore drilling. How long, assuming this policy begins to relent a little bit, would it take for us to develop real energy independence?
We won't do it by drilling. We will improve our balance of payments a little bit, but we borrow over $1 billion a day now to import oil. We've got about 3% of the world's reserves, and we consume 25% of the world's oil. Drilling helps a little bit with balance of payments, but it's no solution. And the same thing is true of what a lot of people on the other side of the spectrum who will say, we have foreign oil problems, so let's build nuclear power plants. Well, nonsense. We can only get 2%. Only 2% of our electricity comes from oil. So you're not doing anything about oil if you build nuclear power plants or even wind farms. You've got to, I think, make cars able to run on other fuels, alcohol-based fuels like methanol, and yes, ethanol too, the way the Brazilians have. You've got to electrify as much as possible. You want to use natural gas where it's readily usable, such as in fleet vehicles like big buses and so on. And I think you want to put a lot of pressure on Detroit to improve mileage, and much more pressure than we put on them already. Do all those things together, you got a chance of making it.
All right, let me flip it around, though. What is the consequence of the Middle East if we are no longer dependent on their foreign oil? What happens to their economy, and would that lead to more poverty and perhaps more extremism in the Middle East?
Their economy would tank in the short run, but they would have to start to do some things to build modern economies, such as educate their women, such as not have totalitarian governments, such as a lot of things that, Saudi Arabia's got a reasonable GDP per capita because it has so much oil. Israel has a 30% higher GDP per capita with no oil. Because it educates its women, has real educational institutions where people learn computer science instead of just memorizing religious books and so on. It would take a fundamental change for the Middle East, but what we've got now is unsustainable.
Gotcha.
We can't sit on what we've got. It's absolutely awful.
Mr. Woolsey, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Jim Woolsey, former CIA director on the Grandy Group.